Shalom. This week we're getting ready to celebrate the biblical holiday of Shavuot, and we're also holding our breath to see when the next shoe will drop, or should I say when the bombs and missiles will start dropping again. U.S. President Donald Trump has issued several warnings to the Iranian regime, but also signaled the desire for a deal to avoid further bloodshed. For their part, the regime has made absurd threats to the effect that if America or Israel start the war again, this time Iran will not hold anything back in responding. Meanwhile, the entire global economy is under pressure from the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz, including here in Israel. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Before we focus in on what's going on this week between Israel, the United States, and Iran, I need to set the stage by talking about the devastating impact that the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz is having on the global economy. But even before we dive into that, we need to harken back to October of 1973, when several oil-exporting countries, led by Saudi Arabia, declared an embargo on countries that had supported Israel in any way during the Yom Kippur War. The list of countries included the United States, Canada, Japan, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Rhodesia, which is now, of course, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Everybody else kept getting their usual supplies, and this embargo only lasted 5 months until March of 1974. But the repercussions of this period on the entire global economy were enormous and lasted for years, resulting in many second and third order effects, some of which we're still feeling. How long will the first, second, and third order effects from the situation we're in now last? I might not live long enough to find out, but what I'm seeing right now, right in front of me, is frightening enough. On Monday, the Reuters news agency issued a report about some of the effects the closure of Hormuz has already had on the global economy. It included the shocking number of $25 billion that 279 large international corporations say they've lost because of the situation. This is only the beginning. The $25 billion in losses those 279 large international companies told us about in the report are going to be passed on to consumers like you and me in all kinds of ways, some more obvious than others. We can also add something here about how many smaller companies and businesses have also lost money or maybe even already gone out of business because of all of this. Now, many jobs have also been cut along with production and distribution, and that's just in the private sector. National, state, and municipal governments all over the world also have higher bills to pay. Last but certainly not least, families and individuals are facing tough choices, like whether to buy sufficient food or necessary medicine, and there is the potential for things to get catastrophically worse. Some really gloomy estimates put losses to the global economy at north of $500 billion by December if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed for an extended period of time. And every week it stays shut, those already scary numbers just get scarier. It means a global recession, millions of lost jobs, shortages of not just gasoline, but many other consumer goods, and even famine in some places, along with social unrest almost everywhere. This is the part where I should be saying that I don't want anyone to panic, but the fact is, it's time to do some very serious planning about what we can do to try and help ourselves, our families, and our communities. It is time to invest serious time in prayer for these issues, because every single person walking this Earth's surface is in a very serious situation. If you can do more than pray, I am encouraging everyone to plant vegetable gardens like people in many countries did during both world wars. Even if you live in a high-rise apartment building in a large city and you're only able to plant some radishes or onions in a pot on your windowsill, go for it. If you live in a rural area and can have a larger garden, go for it. There are tools for any size garden, and seeds, soil, etc. are not hard to find. Now, staying on the subject of shortages and hardship, it is no secret that the long-suffering people of Iran are in desperate shape. They were already coping with shortages of almost everything before this war started, and in case anyone has forgotten, that's why there were so many people demonstrating in the streets against the regime in January. Back then, the real currency was already one of the weakest in the world. Today, you'd need a wheelbarrow to carry around enough paper currency to buy a single cup of coffee, if you can find a shop that sells coffee that has any cleaned-up cups to put it in. Now, don't even ask about cream and sugar unless you're doing business in the black market, which many people are. A barter system has reportedly sprung up, with people trading, among other things, veggies they grow in their windowsills and backyards. I'm not making that up, it's very real. However, there is also a shortage of the most basic commodities of life in many Iranian cities, including fresh water. And anytime there's a shortage of fresh water, there are outbreaks of disease. On top of all this, we're moving into the summer months, and daytime temperatures in many parts of Iran are already approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Very few homes or businesses have functioning AC, air conditioning, and once again, the country is in its sixth consecutive year of a very severe drought, and we are several months away from even the hope of any fresh rain. Partly because of this, millions of Iranians have fled the cities in the center of the country and for the northern districts near the Caspian Sea. There, temperatures are a little bit cooler, and the sea is being used to bring in supplies of food and many other things from Russia and Azerbaijan. However, the infrastructure in the relatively small communities in this region has been overwhelmed by the influx of internal refugees. Well, I could go on and on with these gloomy data points, but I think you get the idea, friends. The people of Iran need a miracle themselves. The regime that rules over them doesn't care about them and is unwilling to swallow their pride and surrender to the Americans, which is the only way they could have any hope of salvaging something out of the ruins that they have reduced the country to already. Now, there's an important caveat I need to make here, because there are a handful of officials in the regime who seem to understand the situation they're in. President Masoud Pezeshkian, who despite his title has very little real power, has bravely spoken out publicly about the need for the IRGC, which does have real power in the Iranian regime these days, to negotiate seriously with the United States to end the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. Once again, it looks like the chances of that happening are lower than the chances of renewed conflict. Maybe after another round of hostilities in which Iran suffers even more severe damage from American and Israeli strikes, even these IRGC lunatics will have no choice but to accept the inevitable. It's worth praying for. Needless to say, here in Israel, there are also some very strong economic headwinds coming our way. This week, another layer was added when the Ministry of Defense issued a request to raise its budget by another 40 billion shekels, which is around 13.3 billion US dollars. If passed, this new budget request, which the IDF says it needs to fund ongoing operations in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and in Judea and Samaria, will bring the budget up to almost 144 billion shekels, or 63 billion US dollars. Wow. This request was made even before a renewal of hostilities with Iran, which at the time we're recording this looks ever more likely, although it hasn't started yet as I'm filming this report in our Jerusalem studios. It might have started by the time you watch this, so I apologize if anything I say here is not up to date. The negotiations may bear some fruit and there won't be a renewal of hostilities. President Trump said on Monday evening that he'd call off an attack meant to commence the very next day, being Tuesday, at the urging of the Gulf allies. This might be true or technically true, or it might be a ruse or a fake out, or it might be a negotiating tactic, or it might be something else entirely. In any case, The economic fallout from all this is very real and completely unavoidable. And that's why here at Vision for Israel, we're doing everything we can to assist families and communities in financial distress, Jewish communities, Arab communities, Druze communities, and those that live in the land of Israel. So if you want to know how you can help, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and please watch this short video. We've now provided over 300,000 brand new school packs with their supplies inside for school children of all ages, but particularly the first and second grades. I just love it when we distribute and when a little child comes up and just hugs you on the leg or gives you a big hug and says thank you. And sometimes they may even have a runny nose. I think it's like one of the cutest things. It melts my heart so much. And I'm going, wow, I hope that when they grow up to be an adult and maybe they've been through the army and university and they have a profession, maybe that memory will stay with them for all those years and decades. And one particular event that we host every year is during the reading of the book of Esther. It's a holiday called Purim, a Jewish holiday. And we host about 400 victims of terror attacks every year with their families and the children. We set up arcades and we have like drumming, bongo lessons and basketball shooting, jumping on a trampoline. I love to get involved in the midst of the children and do the very same. I think that's what Yeshua was dwelling on in Scripture when he said to be as little children. And he said also in Matthew chapter 25, we read in the Gospels that when you've done it to the least of these my brethren, you've done it unto me. In the first half of this report, we talked about Iran, including the possibility of renewed conflict. If and when this happens, it will be almost exclusively a project for the Israeli Air Force with possibly some involvement of the Navy. But in this second half of the report, we need to talk about the situation in 4 areas where the IDF ground forces are deployed: Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Judea and Samaria. We'll start with the front, which is the least active at the moment, but which has the potential to become a very big problem very quickly, and that's in Syria. The IDF continues to deploy forces in the entirety of the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon, and I don't think anyone seriously expects this deployment to end anytime soon. However, the buffer zone extends up to the southern outskirts of Damascus, and that probably will have to be scaled back at some point, but that's an issue that no one is pressing on for now. In Gaza, the IDF has admitted to having taken control of 60% of the territory, and Hamas is making no secret of its intentions to rearm, reorganize, and prepare for another round of fighting. Now, I hate to keep repeating this week after week, but Hamas shows no signs of being the least bit concerned for the terrible conditions that their people are living in, which the Trump plan, with all its flaws and shortcomings, was meant to address. Even while Hamas continues to rearm itself, the IDF's COGAT unit, which deals with the civil affairs in Gaza, reported this week that around 600 trucks loaded with humanitarian supplies continued to be sent into the Strip every single day. Don't you forget that, every single day. Despite this, there are those who continue to insist that the Gaza Strip is under siege and the ordinary people there are being subjected to a campaign of starvation and genocide by the IDF for no reason whatsoever except that Israel is a country full of bloodthirsty maniacs, etc. That's what they're accusing us of, but it's not true, my friends. This week, yet another group of professional and semi-professional Israel haters set sail in several small ships from ports in Turkey with the declared intention of running the blockade of Gaza. The Israeli Navy intercepted this flotilla of attention-seeking agitators off the coast of Cyprus with hardly any fuss. Another group of vehicles sponsored by the same organization that launched the boats set out this week from Sirte in central Libya. Previous land convoys trying to drive their way to Gaza have been unceremoniously arrested and deported by Egyptian security forces. Sometimes they don't even make it to Egypt, being forced to abandon their plans because they run out of money or because people just don't realize what a long trip it is in the hot Mediterranean sun from Sirte to Rafah. It's almost 1,500 miles, just for your information. Now, friends, there's one more footnote about events this past week in Gaza, as the commander of the Hamas forces in the Strip, Izz al-Din al-Haddad, was taken out in an IDF airstrike in Gaza City last Friday. This thug was one of the last surviving architects of the massacre Hamas carried out on October 7, 2023, and he had been known to have surrounded himself with Israeli hostages earlier in the war to try and avoid the very thing which finally did him in, an Israeli airstrike. Now, moving on to Judea and Samaria. This is an area where there has been a lot of activity lately, and I know a lot of folks don't want to hear about this next part, but with that in mind, most of what's keeping the IDF and border police busy in Judea and Samaria these days has to do with the Jewish youths vandalizing Palestinian-owned vehicles, buildings, agricultural fields, and other property. This understandably raises communal tensions between the Jewish people living in these areas and the Palestinian people living in these areas, and the IDF and border police have to maintain a robust presence in order to keep things from spiraling completely out of control. With that having been said, there are reports, including video footage, of IDF troops standing by and not interfering while young Jewish men vandalize Palestinian property. Well, I will tell you very candidly that I believe those reports are probably true. And I will also tell you very candidly that I don't have any ideas about how to address this problem. A related problem is the increasing phenomenon of IDF soldiers posting pictures of themselves to the internet while engaged in behavior that is specifically forbidden for them to participate in. In recent months, this has included smashing a statue of Jesus Christ, which the soldiers found in a Christian village in southern Lebanon. Shame on them. Now, to switch briefly to commentary mode, friends, I've lived in Israel for about 5 decades, and I've seen this country have its ups and downs. But right now, we're in a time when we need your specific prayers in a very specific way. This war, which started in the most brutal and horrific way unimaginable on October 7, 2023, has gone on far longer than any previous war. The IDF was never designed to be mobilized for such a long period of time, and it's a bit of a miracle that the discipline problems it's having aren't much worse. I've talked at great length in these reports about the economic distress almost everyone is dealing with. And I've also mentioned the heartbreaking rates of divorce, domestic violence, delinquency, and so on. This war is far from over, and even if the guns were to fall silent this very moment, the effects of it will be felt for many years to come because almost everyone is traumatized to some degree. So if you're watching this program, please be praying for Israel. It's a priority. If you don't know how to pray, you can sign up for the VFI newsletter at our website, visionforisrael.com, and this will provide you with plenty of material to pray into. We also have an app called VFI News. Now, switching back to the news, I've saved the reports about what's going on in southern Lebanon for last because this is the most active front and the one where the most IDF soldiers have lost their lives in recent weeks. As I said before in the introduction, there is a ceasefire in southern Lebanon, which has just been officially extended by 45 days. But as far as ceasefires go, this one seems to include a great deal of kinetic violence, with casualties on both sides. Most of the rockets and FPV drones used in Hezbollah attacks are being carried out against IDF troops deployed in southern Lebanon, but there are still some projectiles coming over the border and hitting Israeli communities in the Galilee. Regular viewers of this program will not be surprised to hear that Vision for Israel is continuing to supply bomb safety shelters to these communities, as well as many other communities all over the country. We've already installed over 500 bomb safety shelters along the northern and southern borders of Israel. So please watch this short video about this vitally important ongoing program. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know, having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Now we're almost out of time for this week's report, so I'll just quickly mention some of the other big stories making headlines in Israel this week. To start, a group of Israelis led by Arab-Israeli social media influencer Yosef Haddad decided to mount their own flotilla on Sunday, setting sail from the Herzliya Promenade and just sailing around off the coast for a few hours, holding signs with messages like, "Is Gaza free yet?" And I thought this was the party flotilla. I think it's possible that this was just a stunt to try and demonstrate to the world how silly the Gaza blockade running attempts have gotten to be. But Haddad declared that if we encounter the Marmara 2 flotilla, the terror flotilla, our mission is actually to show the world the difference between us and them. They're going to shout terrorists, baby killers, all this nonsense, and we're going to shout peace. We're going to shout about the partnership between Jews and Arabs in Israel, and we're going to show that that partnership is right here, right now, from here. Good for you, Yosef, and all your friends who came on this trip. Israel has struggled with public relations and telling our side of the story for generations, and it's a good sign that young Israelis have some new ideas and are willing to take the initiative. Also, this past week, we marked the anniversary of Israel's Declaration of Independence according to the Gregorian calendar, as well as Jerusalem Day commemorating the reunification of the city during the Six-Day War in 1967. Of course, the Palestinians and their supporters call this Nakba, which in Arabic is a word that means catastrophic or catastrophe. This year, the mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, posted a video on his social media accounts which was meant to be a commemoration of the Nakba. The video, which omitted some very relevant historical context from the narrative it presented, was produced using public funds and staff of the mayor's office and was viewed 11 million times in the first few days it was posted. It drew strong criticism, but Mamdani was unrepentant, prompting several Jewish groups to announce that they are boycotting his upcoming Jewish American Heritage Month events. And by the way, friends, and my Jewish friends out there, why did you vote for Mamdani in New York? Did you ask yourselves that for many of you Jewish people in New York City? Chaval. It's a shame. Well, to make a brief comment, when Mamdani was elected mayor of New York, some people said the city had fallen, while others said, let's wait and see. Well, my own take on it is that New York City fell off a cliff a long time ago, and the nearly 2 million Jewish residents of the greater New York metropolitan area should have already been making plans for Aliyah to Israel. Mamdani is a highly visible symptom of a much bigger issue in New York, and by extension, the entire Western world. Jewish people need to get the message that God has a plan for their lives, and that plan involves them being in the land He gave to their forefathers. God's plans and purposes will move forward, and He can accomplish them with as many or as few people as are willing to cooperate with Him. Now we've come to the end of our report for this week, and I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news, so here it is. Israel scored 2 diplomatic victories this past week, one in Europe and the other in Africa. I'm talking about the Israeli vocal artist Noam Bitan placing second at the 2026 Eurovision Song Contest and the reception of Dr. Mohammed Haji to serve as the first ambassador of Somaliland to Israel. Anti-Israel sentiment is on the rise all over the Western world, but Israel's alliances with its Arab neighbors keep getting stronger, and I could devote an entire report just to developments with India, but we'll have to save it for next time. With that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of the VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom.